Again. Hi, I'm Larry Johnson, and welcome to this latest episode of brought to you by the International Unity Club. I am fortunate to have General Eduard Basurin with us today. General, my apologies for my screw up earlier, but I'm human, I make mistakes.
No, I'm not a general, I'm a colonel.
Oh, well, you're of a military experience, and it's an honor to have you here. Let's just dive right into it with the West. I don't know if you've had a chance to watch the generals in the West, David Petraeus, Ben Hodges, Admiral Stavridis. A number of them were commanders of the European Command, the U.S. European Command, or held high positions in NATO. They are constantly portraying the Russian military as inept, inexperienced, not very good. And I'm always a bit amused by that, because these are the same people that fought in Afghanistan for 20 years and couldn't defeat a Taliban who did not have tanks, did not have artillery, did not have any kind of air superiority or air support to speak of, didn't have any intelligence. And, you know, after 20 years, the United States had to abandon the field. Whereas Russia now for 3.5 years has been fighting a proxy NATO force. So how does that Western criticism resonate within Russia? And if you had a chance to talk to those American generals, what would you say?
Well, you said that Western generals, these are those that are managing either in Europe or in the United States or whatever states, they are speaking negative about us. Of course, there is a part of truth in it, because if we take a look at the history, their participation in the history, really they did not participate in the war. When I talk about Korea and Vietnam, that was a long time ago. And those people don't exist anymore. They're not in power. You give an example, Afghanistan, but it wasn't war there. There was killing people, and they said that they thought that they're better than us, and they still remember us.
Yeah.
They are afraid because they don't know what they would expect from us. And so this rhetoric that they hold, that they say that that we are not able for anything. You know, what would I tell them? I don't know. Probably first of all, I would tell them that, what do you want to leave behind yourself? That's the main thing. Because each one of them have kids, grandkids, families. You know, they want peace for their children or war. Because if they want war for them, there's nothing to talk to them about. I wouldn't really want to talk to them. If they want peace, then we can find a dialogue. And with professionals, you can always find a language to speak, because the war is known in this or that manner, everybody. Some more because we have practice, some less. But, you know, they heard it from people before him. They saw the battlefield all over the world. So if you have a desire, we can talk. I have not seen this a desire from the so-called generals.
The thing I found, you know, as an outside observer watching the Russian military response, again, for the last 30 years, as I've done the research, it seems that the plan of the West was always to attack Russia and to use Ukraine as a proxy to do so. And there has been that the use of military exercises with both NATO and U.S. European Command to train Ukrainian forces, to prepare them. Was there a point in this over the last 30 years where within the Russian military you said, hey, wait a second, this is not a collaborative, friendly effort directed at us. This is one that it's an attack that's developing. Was there ever that realization?
How should I name him, Larry or better, or Mr. Johnson?
You may call me Larry, sir.
Larry, look, what took place 30 years ago, we were all guilty about that. And the events that we have now, this is what we reap the fruit. Ukraine was constantly torn apart from Russia. Yes, we saw that. Yes, we saw that. The politicians that were in Ukraine, they helped it take place in every way possible. If we talk from the military point of view, they did it. But the thinking of Ukrainian officers, that had to be changed. The methods of how they prepared Soviet or Russian officers is the same. NATO officers, completely different thing, different mindset, different battlefield behavior. The practice they had in Ukraine, they've been planning of those. Sometimes people were trying, Ukrainian people, they were trying to block it this or that way. That took place a lot in Crimea. They didn't allow that to happen. What happened in Western Ukraine or Central Ukraine, local people, they didn't react. They didn't try much to change. But the problem, you have to take a look that Russia was not really stopping. Russia constantly was thinking that we're united people. That's the way they looked at it. We have the same roots. And the politicians that were then in Ukraine, they will not hurt Russia. We missed the point. Now we're reaping the fruit.
Yeah.
Whether we want it or not, these are the fruits. This is the aftermath that we have.
One of the things I've been impressed with, and I think a lot of the folks in the West miss, is the stereotypical view of the Russian military is that it is rigid, it is old, it is wedded to outdated concepts. But what I've watched over the course of the last three and a half years is flexibility, innovation, and rapid reaction to changes on the battlefield. What is it about the Russian military that allows that to take place?
Our history. Our president, Mr. Putin, he constantly speaks, look at the history of Russia. This is our history. Our history makes us flexible. Because if we look at the history of our empire, it was developed not because of the power of taking over, but due to dialogue, that we would give the safety guarantee. We're not ready for war on one side, but we're ready to fight on the other side. You have mentioned names of the generals, NATO generals, Western generals. But sometimes you have to take a look what politicians say. Just Minister of Foreign Affairs of Poland, Mr. Sikorski, that Russia is impossible to win. You know why? Because they are ready to sacrifice. In Europe, if we talk about this, we're not ready for sacrifice. That's impossible to take over Russians, and that's for 30 years and before. Did they try to shake Russia? Yeah, they found the worst point, the most painful point, Ukraine. They were able to do that. They will continue to try to do the Baltic countries, Caucasus, Asia. They'll try to get into every territory, hoping that we will lose the strength, the human power, our spirit, and our faith. They constantly want to knock down our faith, and our faith was the one fundamental, that's the truth. And truth always wins.
Yeah, there's a book recently published by a friend of mine named Scott Horton. It's called Provoked. And it is the premise of the book is how the West provoked the war, the special military operation in Ukraine. And it traces back to 1991 and really focuses upon what happened as George H.W. Bush was leaving office, then what happened with Bill Clinton as president, where, that's really where the decision to expand NATO went into effect, and to that the planning within the intelligence, within the special services, was to figure out a way to ultimately, how do we attack, how do we weaken Russia? But then it went through George W. Bush, et cetera. And it's clear that this has been, it's been at least a 35-year effort to figure out how to subvert Russia in this process. And within it were a number of assumptions about Russia, about the military, that have now, as a result of the special military operation, been exposed as fraudulent. For example, they assumed that the Russian economy was weak, and that the only way that the Russian army would function was through coercion and brutality by the officers, and that junior officers or senior enlisted personnel on the front lines would have no flexibility, no ability to make decision. I think now what we're seeing is the West is reaping the results of those false assumptions, because they never counted on the ability of Russia to so quickly mobilize, not just manpower, but mobilize its industrial power to bring that where it comes together in support of the military operation. Were you surprised at all by that, or is that has been your experience during your career?
Okay, let's begin from the end. The problem, what took place in both yours, ours, that's weak special forces, if we speak about before 1991, like last century, somewhere in 1985, two empires, USSR and United States, a constant competition, but there was a respect. And we had professionalism of those people who were involved, so they did not let all these hot spots, flaming spots. When USSR fell apart, the West understood that they can buy us with the money, as they thought, our mindset. You can do anything with the money, that's what they thought. Right. And we lost professionalism, both us and your country. When they started that process, they calculated that we didn't have enough resources. So it would be easy to take over us, but that we don't have the faith that people are ready to die for. I saw that in 2014 when they started the process at Ukraine, and I called it civil war. Everybody was trying to shut me up because what you call civil war.
Right.
No, that's the worst part, is the civil war in the world. I have seen Ukraine army that was also defeated from the inside. They didn't want to fight. They couldn't fight. What is that? What would we have now? That's one of the best armies in the world concerning defense on our possibilities. And Russia also was hitting the wrong spot. And us too. It was hard for us even to, they didn't have any experience. Why do you need to how deep can you dig the hole to hide in, how to protect yourself with masks that gives you an opportunity to survive. We were learning that as we were going. And officers, I don't know. I am the officer. We were not from, officers, so we never were taught to hate the opponent. Mm-hmm. We were prepared to respect the opponent. And first of all, you got to kill the opponent.
Right. But
if you don't do that, you will be killed. But the main thing we were taught is this, that the battlefield, wherever it would be, first thing we had to do, we had to be responsible for the people. We have a different approach. We had to protect our people. You cannot make a soldier do something by the order. Just an example. The biggest percent of losses of the officers that we had, that's the bottom part. That speaks about that they led people.
Right. They were not sitting back behind.
Yes, that's right. If we talk about the NATO standard, American standard, which is the same thing, the officers are sitting in the back. Surgeons are doing the job, but we have the young officers. They lead people, and people follow them, and people are ready to die for them. That's the difference.
Yeah.
One thing you can hate, another thing is a respect, not a fear, but a respect. That's the difference of the preparation of the officers that we have here and there, and that is our strength.
Yeah, I was fortunate when I left the Central Intelligence Agency in 1989 and moved to the Department of State to work in the Office of Counterterrorism. My boss was a retired Marine colonel, and I became unofficially indoctrinated into the U.S. Marine Corps because his motto was, officers eat last. And sometimes people will say things and never live it, but he lived it. He made sure that the needs of others, those who are under his responsibility, were taken care of first before he would even consider taking care of himself. Now, that's unusual. That attitude is not present in the U.S. Army or in the other branches of the U.S. service. So, what you said about leading from the front, I think, is one of the distinguishing characteristics of both the Russian army and then the militias that came out of Donetsk. How, when we look back at the start of the war and the aftermath of Maidan, how is it that the militias in Donbass were able to survive and stand up to what was essentially a NATO-trained army at the time?
No, it was not a pure NATO army. They had instructors, yes, non-officially they were there. Army was Soviet. Just, there was a different state, different flag. What's the power of Donbass? Nobody really thought about it. Donbass has empire desires, ambitions. You cannot push Donbass. You cannot pressure Donbass. With Donbass, you can only negotiate. If you try to press it, it becomes like a defense wall that you cannot break through. Mm-hmm. That's where it all started. A lot of people didn't understand what is the war and what it brings to them. But the spirit strength, that empire beginning of the people, that they had those mindset, united them together. Those officers that had a fighting experience both in U.S. and in America, in USSR, they had a colossal experience. They used it because you noticed that, correct? Your teacher. First of all, you have to think about the soldier. You got to feed the soldier. You got to give him hot food. You got to dress him. You got to give him a gun. You got to give him the bullets.
Right.
And manage, right, that he would stay alive. I told the same people under me, we don't need heroes. Because in my understanding, hero is the one that we were crying after. We need professionals.
Right.
Because we need to fight further. That was our approach. And politicians in Ukraine, they did not evaluate it correctly. They did not believe that by sending planes, tanks, artillery, that people were ready to die for their future. They thought that everybody would run away. Nobody did. They all stayed. And instructors were coming in more often and often and often. And they thought that they knew war better than us. War, Iraq, Syria.
Yeah.
None were there.
Right.
Those wars that they had, like Korea, big war. No winner. Vietnam, in a way there were no winners, but they made a decision to leave Vietnam. No, Afghanistan, what it was just aviation, artillery, killing on the squares, all that was moving around alive. Then you had the regular infantry coming in. If they cannot come in, then they bomb again. So that's the war. And that's a different war here. Again, I repeat, in America, people have to understand that we have empire ambitions. No, the people from Donbass have it. And that's why they hated us all the time in Ukraine. They always wanted to put us on our knees. There's two things in Ukraine. There's West Ukraine and Donbass.
Yeah.
Always hitting each other, hit each other on the head. Those two imperialistic conditions of ambitions. We don't want what they have, but they want what we have. So let's talk about different things. You are mentioning, if I can, that you mentioning that West always wants to fight, and they, in any case, try to do so. And it's possible to do it in Ukraine. I see that the clock of the judging hour comes close to 12 to noon as truth. So the speeches that they give by your president, I will supply Tomahawks, I won't do that.
Right.
This or that. The speeches by your generals, that we cannot fight, that we cannot move, you can win over us. Speeches that nuclear weapon is okay. And those statements, these are, just like local things. And a question to you, as to the person who lives inside U.S., you are in that soup, right, in that salad. Why does your president make such statements? Does he want our President Putin to act decisively? What do you think?
It's founded in ignorance. The ignorance, the American people generally, they're decent people, but they are not well educated, and they don't really have a good understanding of the world. Particularly the images of Russia are filtered through the media, and the average American still thinks that Russia is an authoritarian, communist, godless nation with no understanding of what they've been through, and no understanding of the U.S., let's go back 80 years, a continued history of trying to subvert and destroy Russia. It's a situation where if you're in a bar and you keep poking somebody in the chest, and finally that person retaliates and punches you in the face, you don't get to go out and claim that they were the ones who provoked the incident. You were the ones who provoked it. Yet the United States has been poking Russia in the chest now for 80 years. And so when Russia hits back, we'll say, see, that proves that they are the aggressor. So these comments that are made about nuclear war, about deploying the Tomahawks, it's grounded in ignorance. Now, the problem, or one of the things I have raised, is that in the West, they misinterpret President Putin's patience for weakness. In other words, if the roles were reversed, if Russia was in Mexico supplying the cartels with weapons, and the cartels were launching attacks across the border into the United States would view that as an act of war, and we would retaliate. But I understand why President Putin doesn't, because he understands the cost of war, what the Russian people understand. In World War II, you lost 27 million people. In the United States, in terms of the European theater, we had 189,000 die, total. That's nothing. I mean, the average family in the United States did not suffer loss during the Great Patriotic War. We made money out of it. Whereas the Russian people, they paid with their blood, which is why they remember to this day, and why the Russians, despite the reputation for being warlike, are so hesitant to go to war. At least that's how I see it.
Well, you have mentioned history, then go back 100 years ago when Soviet Union was born. The first hand who gave? America. Yes, you said that they made money, colossal money, yes, huge money, but they understood that you can make money on that, and they has given a friendship help to the Soviet Union, the industrialization, the help industry, the development. Your people built the plants. Your workers came to do that. So you can find necessary moments when it's good for you, profitable for you.
Да.
We start talking about Tomahawks. I make an assumption you answer they don't know, they're ignorant, and they think that we're weak. What if we come from another side? The first thing I said that I want to push our president and said yes, that Mr. Putin is patient. That's why he doesn't do these or those steps. But if we look on the other side, as I see in eyes, in the way your president speaks, it's always there's like he doesn't respect the politicians in Europe, the contempt.
Right.
And he wants to put EU and Russia together with the help of this baseball bat of the Tomahawk.
Yeah.
Do you think that's the case?
No, look, Trump doesn't understand the Tomahawk. So, and most people, it's become this iconic symbol, but they don't understand its real capability. One, it doesn't carry a massive warhead. It can carry up to about a 300-pound warhead, which is, that's a big explosive, but it is a targeted weapon. It's designed to take out a bunker or out a satellite station. A friend of mine who is a Russian expatriate who moved to the United States, but has written several books. His name is Andrei Martyanov. And Andrei did an analysis the other day because he was trained as a Soviet military officer. And he took just one example, one refinery, massive refinery in Russia. It would take 100 Tomahawk missiles to destroy that refinery. The United States doesn't have 100 Tomahawk missiles. The most they were talking about giving Ukraine was 20 to 50. And that's all with the assumption that Russian air defense is not going to shoot them down, which the Russians clearly have an advantage on the air defense side. So the Tomahawk talk is, it's more, I think, to give Trump an excuse for when the war ends to say, well, look, I tried to do everything I could, including giving them Tomahawks, but the Tomahawk is not a game changer. It was configured 34 years ago to carry a nuclear warhead. And from that standpoint, as a Russian military planner, yes, you'd have to be worried about that. But they have not been so configured since then. So it would require 6 months to a year or more of effort on the part of the United States, even if they could do it, which there's questions. Because as we've seen, the United States cannot do massive production of HIMARS or of TACAM missiles or M1 Abrams tanks or 155 millimeter artillery shells. This special military operation has exposed the lack of strategic depth on the part of the U.S. military industrial complex.
You think that their mindset is they think quicker than the industry?
I think what?
That their industry thinks better and faster than the military?
Oh,
That
no.
the special...
No, what has happened is over the course of the last 50 years, the United States has deindustrialized. And I used the illustration of I graduated from high school, well, now 52 years ago. Oh, when I graduated from high school, my father worked in a steel plant. He was a foreman. And my other friends, their fathers also were employed in either steel plants, plants that made agricultural products, harvesters, tractors, automobiles, Standard Oil refinery. Those industries that existed in my hometown, and it was outside of Kansas City, Missouri, Independence, Missouri, the home of Harry S. Truman. They're all gone. They don't exist anymore. So it's like, it's one thing to say, okay, yeah, we would want to build certain weapon systems, but we don't have the factories to do it. As they tried to ramp up with the 155 millimeter shell. They haven't been able to do it. They can't even produce enough in a month that would sustain Ukrainian operations for a week. So this is, we in World War II, Russia and the United States, they had the same capacity to produce tanks. The United States, the Sherman tank, and the Russians, the T-34. Today, the United States doesn't have that capability. And I don't know if that's appreciated in Russia.
Of course we know about that. The direction that we took about concerning the weaponry, yes, it was for the places, for points. You didn't have to have a lot of these bullets. You just had to make them necessary, available to knock out this or that station. It's a problem for everybody. It was a problem for everybody, for both countries. First, in the beginning of 2000, we thought that experts were writing, they were saying artillery survived, we don't need it, we just need rockets, and the war will be two types, nuclear or like a small missile on a local area.
Correct.
That's it. So these plans were ceased to exist. They stopped making tanks, no need of tanks, but the war, this war that takes place now in Ukraine has proved the mistakenness of thinking. You need artillery. The fire thickness, the density of fire, they can, of course, they change them with drones, but you still need bullets, you still need rockets, and to knock out the square local area, you need it also because you knock down logistics, that's it, the front line starts breaking down. On our side or on their side, and you especially saw that. They understood the mistaken direction on the development of the military complex. So on one side, they're trying to stop this moment, beginning of the big war, as they say. Why they do that? To restore the production that is possible. So they try to keep Russia under pressure. So Russia wouldn't sign a peace treaty. They have not getting ready their industry, as you said, their logistics. They have re-overthinking, but they forget the story, they forget the history again.
Yeah.
When we went into the World War II, industry was not developed like in Europe. We didn't have as many tanks and guns because they produced more. We had to have time, but we did it. But the difference is that that time and this time, we have to acknowledge we had ideology. Now we don't have it. We have like a patriotism just like you. And for that word, people are ready to sacrifice in this or that manner. Then we had ideology. Everybody wanted to die for their idea, from young to old. But we still have that a little bit left, so you cannot scare us. But Tomahawks, people don't know what would be inside of that Tomahawk.
Well, yeah, and that the ignorance, the lack of knowledge about it, that's the legitimate concern. I do not think the way that this originated in the Trump administration, they did not think it through. It was not part of a strategy. I think it was more of an emotional reaction. But as we've seen, now going back to the summer of 2022, every single Wunderwaffen or Western weapon introduced into the theater has ultimately been countered by and defeated by Russia. Not one of them has succeeded. And the West fully expected them to succeed. And so that's a good objective military analyst in the West has to recognize that they're at a great deficit. And we haven't even talked about the advantage that Russia has with respect to drones. We're not just talking one type, multiple, 4 or 5 different variants, and with hypersonic missiles. The West doesn't have anything to match with a hypersonic missile. It's been unable to produce ones that can operate in the field. So let me turn around the question and ask you, does Russia appreciate how much strategic advantage it has now over the United States? Or is it calculating that there's a parity?
Let me say it this way. The professionals are coming back. And if the profession does analysis due to the data that coming in from the spies, from the special services, they can forecast when the enemy can do this or that, perform this or that types of weapon. We're getting ready for that. We constantly perfect what we have. We are not stop at one spot. We don't believe that the advantage that we have is going to be forever.
Right.
What's the America problem? America believes that what they have, the advantage they have, hey, nobody can take over them.
Correct.
And the development that they had to invest, they stopped investing. It's none there, and it's hard to catch up. They can't catch up because new physical substances or chemical with materials that we have at the speeds and the temperatures that we have, they cannot bring to a logical end.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the difference.
Yeah.
We look ahead. Just recently, we had our president state that soon you will hear about the new types of weapon that uses. Everybody was laughing in 2018. Pictures. But these pictures exist in reality. They are not on a theory, they're not on paper. You can go touch them. And that happens constantly.
Yeah.
But we do that we don't want to attack. We want to be safe. The rhetorics that mass media does from U.S. We want to attack. This is a bear. This is the worst animal.
Right.
By the way, you know why we have a symbol as a bear?
No.
That's the only animal that never shows aggression about what they want to do. They're strong. Never shows aggression. That's why people are afraid of bears and respect them. That's how we live. If you don't touch us, we're not going to touch you. But the mistakes that we've done starting from 1991, we're not going to repeat them anymore.
Yeah.
We will constantly perfect our weapon to protect ourselves. That's the main principle that we have and helps us to survive.
Well, there's the story, the joke in the West they tell about the bear. 2 people are camping, and all of a sudden they hear this bear coming at them, and one man begins to put his shoes on. The other one says, "What are you doing? You can't outrun the bear." And the man says, "I don't have to outrun the bear. I just have to outrun you." So,
Larry, so the question for you, it's not a secret for you. When your president was raised, his father, he was sympathized to, I'm not going to gives loud statements, Nazis or fascism that were in Europe and in Germany, including. He raised his son this way. Do you really think that Donald Trump, maybe he wants to bring back fascism in a way just like his father respected it?
No, I don't think so. Trump is not guided by an ideology. He's very transactional. Think of him more, he's the television star who's guided by ratings. So if a lot of what he says and does is to attract attention, as opposed to putting together a plan that he's going to take step A to go to step B to go to step C. It was like what happened last week at Sharm el-Sheikh, that his peace plan, well, number one, he didn't have either the Israelis or the Palestinians there. So it was like Donald Trump officiating at a wedding, but you didn't have a bride or groom, but he still held the wedding, and he had his cast behind him, but notice who wasn't there. No Russian representative, no Chinese representative. So the two of the most important countries in the world, if you're really going to talk about a peace settlement, you'd want to have on board. But Trump is looking only for that particular optic. I think he now realizes that this war in Ukraine is lost, and he's been trying to shift as much of the blame to Europe as possible. And Europe, despite all of their bellicose statements directed at Russia, again, they don't have any ability to execute on what they talk about. And that's the saving grace. Because if they did have that ability to execute, then we'd be looking at a massive war. I maintain that a lot of this conflict, it has its roots in the fact that the post-World War II system, the economic political order that was put in place in 1946, 1947, it's collapsing. And that Russia, along with China, are in the process of creating a new world economic and political order. And the West is fighting against it, but there's nothing they can do to stop it.
From what you said, the problem is of a current administration that they think with the categories of tactics, not strategy.
Absolutely, absolutely. The United States, we don't do strategy, okay? We don't play chess, we play checkers.
I don't agree quite with all, because what happened earlier, the development of the relationship that took place with the whole world and United States, something was remembered like a Chinese. They look at the tens of years ahead,
Yeah.
and even those checkers, it's like a game.
Yeah.
It's 100 checkers. That's more difficult than 64 squares, 8 by 8. You have
Yeah.
to think with a different category. It's still those questions they worked on. There was some kind of final goal. Now I see that rating today. Make money. To say to be war, hey, papers said the market went down.
Yeah.
Then no war, then you buy it. That's just business.
Yeah.
But there is no who to talk to as politicians. The way Russia and Chinese think is completely different. We
Yes.
think about what we're going to leave behind ourselves.
Yeah.
What can we change now?
I fully agree. In fact, I had a brief conversation with Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov back in December of 2023, and at the time, he expressed consternation, concern, that there was nobody for Russia to talk to in Washington, that there was no communication. Now at least, thank God, there is communication. It may not always be the best, but at least Russia and the United States are talking, that Putin and Trump are talking. And I think President Putin has a good grasp upon what that Donald Trump is going to say some outrageous things, but Russia doesn't necessarily need to react to those because they have other assurances that the United States is going to say one thing but actually do another that will ultimately benefit Russia and serve the purposes of moving us towards peace. Well, we're unfortunately out of time. I got to show you the picture because I was looking at the picture of the thing on top and I thought, boy, man, he looks a lot younger now. So, Colonel, it has been a pleasure. I thank you for taking this time to have this discussion. And I'm sure for those, particularly I look forward, it's going to be translated into English. It'll be seen by people in the United States, in other English-speaking countries, and I think they'll develop a greater appreciation for what has been taking place in the Donbass and what's taking place with Russia. On behalf of the International Unity Club and TASS, thank you so much.
Thank you for your words, for your kind words in the end. For your listeners, I want to add something else, that people in Russia, they think that we need to be friends. This last thing that your president stated concerning to have a tunnel between Alaska and Chukotka. In one way, I discussed that at one time with Dmitry Wydrin. We have this political consultant, one of the best ones, I think, presently in the post-Soviet area. He offered that to Elon Musk. Elon Musk said offer next, and your president voiced it. That says that we want to be friends with you. I understand it might not be a very, very close friendship, but to create terms and conditions that we will exist comfortably. Thank you for your time. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Спасибо.